So you brought up something when you wrote me back, we had chatted about some things that I wanted to mention, and you reminded me of a
Yeah.
passage that I had like, oh yeah, I forgot that was in Numbers, and that's the Numbers chapter 5 and the
Yeah.
ritual, because this gets lampooned all the time on like atheist or skeptic memes.
Yeah.
This is pointed to regularly as an example of how the Bible had these trial by ordeals, and women were guilty until proven innocent and all of this stuff, which is just the opposite of
Right.
what the passage is about. But what I'm going to do is pull up. So now viewers can see both of our lovely faces, but they can also see the text of
Oh, good.
Numbers 5. I've got the Hebrew on the left. And then since you're a good Gospel Coalition guy, I've got the ESV pulled up. Like to accommodate my guests. So,
I love NIV too. So,
oh, okay. Well, I wasn't going to presume, but,
yeah.
but it also, the kind of more literal in this, at least in some of the things, might be a
Yeah.
little easier to track. But Numbers 5, what is going on with this? As you can see viewers can see on my screen, a test for adultery.
Right.
So, can you explain this ritual? And
Yes.
then why this is not just a barbaric, woman-hating, awful thing that we should tear out of our Bibles.
Yep. So when you read through the text, the basic ritual goes like this. A husband has suspected his wife of adultery. So they go to the tabernacle together. They come before the priest, and a ritual ensues. And in the ritual, the woman looses her hair. The priest writes a curse on parchment, and the curse is that if she's been faithless, if she has committed adultery, she hasn't been caught in the act. Her husband's just suspicious. So the priest writes a curse that and there's debate on how do you translate the terms, but her belly will swell, her womb will fall. There are different ways it's translated, but something happens physically. It seems she's not going to be able to have kids. And then the priest rinses the curse off into water, adds some dust from the tabernacle floor, and the woman drinks it, and basically says, if I'm guilty, may these be bitter waters that cause the curse to happen. And that's it. That's the ritual. And we read through this. In fact, I'm teaching Pentateuch this semester, and we got to this ritual, and I asked the class, what are some of the challenges with this? And men and women in the class, and they began to name all sorts of different things. Like, this seems like magic. It seems like it's unfair because there's not a similar trial for the man. This is shame-inducing. So we listed all these things, and I said, "Yep, this is a tough passage. Just wanted to note that. Let's go on to number 6." And they looked at me. I said, "Just kidding." So anyway, we dove back in to look at what's going on. And so there are a few things to say here. The first is, and so I've got some show and tell here. This is often called a trial by ordeal. Mm-hmm. And a trial by ordeal is when guilt or innocence is not clear, but somebody's suspected of being guilty. They go through some ceremony or ritual that often, how it's been practiced in the history of the world, ends up being harmful to them, whether they're innocent or not. So you think of this,
throw them in a river, and if they don't drown, then they're innocent.
Well, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that one. So you might have talked with your viewers before about these books, Ancient Near Eastern Texts. Have you guys talked about these before?
I have read from it a couple of times and from Context of Scripture, but yes.
Okay, great. So I thought your viewers would be interested. Mm-hmm. So the traditional or classic for
you hold up just a little bit higher. There we go, so they can see.
So the classic for resource for looking at texts from the ancient Near East is this volume by Pritchard. Mm-hmm. You might see it referred to sometimes just as ANET, Ancient Near Eastern Texts. Mm-hmm. He did a companion volume, ANEP, that has pictures. Mm-hmm. And these are super interesting because they go through, like, for example, I'm not sure how clearly it will come through, but here is a relief, ancient Near Eastern relief, and it's actually of Jehu bowing before Shalmaneser.
Uh-huh.
So a story right out of Kings that we actually have a picture of it happening, which is
Cool.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Or another. Uh, so here, what you see, these are some people who are greeting a king,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see that their hands are raised, which helps you to know. Like I grew up in a context we didn't raise our hands in church. You know what's that about? Why does the Bible talk about that? Well, these pictures show that's what you did before a king.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden that helped me to in worship realize, okay, this is a way of saying, Lord, you're the king, and I'm giving you glory for the. So anyway, those two, that's the classic source. The more recent source, which you just mentioned, is the context of scripture.
Mm-hmm.
It comes in 4 volumes, and they don't have pictures, these guys, but they've got a lot more texts and they have more modern translations.
Right. A little easier to read their English in context
Yeah,
of scripture.
absolutely. So that's all lead up to say trial by ordeal. Hammurabi's laws list a trial by ordeal. So here's law number 2 from Hammurabi. If a man charges another man with practicing witchcraft, but cannot prove it, then he who is charged with witchcraft shall go to the divine river ordeal. He shall indeed submit to the divine river ordeal. If the divine river ordeal should overwhelm him, so in other words, he's got to go down to the river and jump in. Mm-hmm. And if he dies, then what happens? So if I've accused you of this, then you're going to the river. If you don't make it out, it says that I get your estate. Mm-hmm. But if the divine river ordeal should clear that man and he survives, so you survive, then he who made the charge shall be killed. And so that's the divine river ordeal. Mm-hmm. That matters because when you come over to law 132, you read, if a man's wife should have a finger pointed against her in accusation involving another male. So in other words, you have said to me, your wife had committed adultery with somebody. Mm-hmm. Although she's not been seized lying with another male, she shall submit to the divine river ordeal for her husband. In other words, my wife would have to go jump in the river to try and prove that she was innocent. Right. Now, that kind of trial or by ordeal, you know what happened? A lot of innocent people died. Mm-hmm. Some commentators, therefore, don't even want to call this a trial by ordeal. Mm-hmm. Because drinking these waters, it's got a bit of dust in them. The priest doesn't make this like a Slurpee, right?
Right.
And so this is like swimmers at the beach. You ingest water with sand in it all the time. It's not harmful. There's no harm here unless the Lord himself brings judgment to pass. And that's where, when I turn the question back to my class and say, okay, put yourself back in this context, how could this be helpful? They begin to name things like this. Well, actually, this takes justice out of the hands of an angry husband mm-hmm. or an angry mob and puts it into the hands of the Lord. Oh, this trial actually becomes public justification. There can't be murmur campaigns, whispering campaigns, because the Lord, if the woman's innocent, the Lord himself has declared her to be innocent. And that's where I'll pause. I'll ask my students, how many of you have been publicly slandered and you couldn't prove your innocence, but if this were an option, you would go through it to restore your name. Mm-hmm. And this year, almost half the class put up their hand. So that's another advantage. The question still comes, yeah, but there's nothing for the man. Like it's just the woman who has to do this. And that's where we begin to think about the fact, first of all, the man shouldn't think he's going to get away. Be sure your sin will find you out. Mm-hmm. The Lord's punishment always comes. If the couple is caught in the act, the man faces the same penalty. They're both put to death. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that we remember is many of a society's laws are there to protect people from unjust suffering. So in an ancient Near Eastern setting, you had laws, Israel had laws saying you have to treat the sojourner fairly. Why did they have those laws? Well, because in an ancient Near Eastern setting, you could take advantage of a sojourner, or because of greed, or maybe just from xenophobia or whatever it is. That's not right. That reality is not right, but it's a reality. And so you have laws to protect. In the same way, in an ancient Near Eastern setting, a husband that was suspected of adultery by his wife, he wasn't in danger.
Right.
The wife was in danger. That's not right, but it was a reality. Mm-hmm. And so that's another reason for a law like this. It's actually incredibly protective. So what the long and the short of it is, what we, from a modern perspective, often look at with high suspicion, an ancient Israelite woman is able to look at as protective care.
Right.
And entirely different from having to throw herself into a river.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a point. And I want to make sure viewers don't gloss over this. This ritual, go back and read the text. Like Jay said, there's debate about what it means that like her thigh will fall. Is that infertility or is some kind of disfigurement or something? But the key point is that the thing she drinks is just water with a little bit of dust and a paper, possibly flecks of ink in it, right, at most, but probably on par with the normal water most people in the ancient world would drink anyway in terms of hygiene. Yeah. There was nothing dangerous about it. Right. Only God would have to supernaturally intervene in order for the curse to take effect. That's the point that's missed by all of the people that just throw this verse out as, whatever, magic or, misogyny or this and that. Do you find any value in I know, because I know some of my Old Testament friends do and some don't, in like William Webb's redemptive hermeneutic movement? And would you see that as an example of this, where looking from our perspective, yes, we would want laws to involve the man and the woman because our perspective is one on this side of, Jesus' treatment of women and sort of cultural movement. But in an ancient Near East patriarchal society where slavery was a real thing, where wars and captives were a real thing, that was moving them in a redemptive direction. Do you find validity in that, or do you think that is there a better way to explain how an Old Testament law can fall short of what ultimately we would see as a kingdom ethic in that particular setting?
I wouldn't, in this, I'd be slower to apply it in this context, because I think this is a law that's trying to deal with addressing the reality of what society was like at that time.
The power dynamic.
Of course, the Bible doesn't want society to be one in which women face that danger. Right. But for me, this wouldn't be as much a place where I'd take Webb's approach with this. I would throw in, back to the magic thing, Wenham makes the point that while we tend to look at this as magic, what's actually taking place here is we are seeing a visual prayer or an enacted prayer. Because when you do this ritual at the tabernacle, before the presence of the Lord, it's very clear you're praying for him to be the one who carries out justice. And so from that perspective, it's no more, its effect is no more magical than God answering prayer. That's what's taking place. And
I think whenever there's a mechanism, people start to get a little antsy, like Jesus rubbing mud on somebody's eyes, they start to focus on the mud. And then that's when I think people, because that's what magic is, manipulating physical elements. But that's absolutely not what's going on. I love that. This is a visual prayer. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.